Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Bible in 1 Year with the Preacher's Husband. Today we're talking about Numbers chapter 8, 9, and 10. And there is a lot in here. We start out talking about the lampstand or the menorah that they referred to in chapter 3 and chapter 4 as a symbol of God's presence and glory. And then we go through a purification process in chapter 8 verses 5 through 7. And that process involved 3 steps. First one was sprinkling with purification water, and that was probably taken from the bronze basin that was in the outer courts of the tabernacle. Step 2 was shaving their entire bodies, as a Nazirite would do if he were to break his vow. And number 3 was washing of their clothes. Now then they would do their offerings, or their sin offering and the burnt offering, in that order, following the delineation in Leviticus that we had read about. First for ceremonial purification, of course, and then second for consecration. Now, the Levites, as we had talked about before, served as assistants to the Aaronic priests. But there was an addendum here in this chapter. Verses 23 through 26 of chapter 8, it says, referring to the dedication of the Levites, it cites here that the retirement age is 50 and their minimum age of service is 25 years. But when we read in chapter 4, verse 3, it says that the minimum age was 30, not 25. So some scholars, they attempt to resolve this inconsistency by saying, well, what it was the Levites would serve a 5-year apprenticeship. They would start at age 25, and they weren't totally 100% on their job until they were 30. They were training in this training process for 5 years. Others would suggest that the minimum age was raised as a result of the deaths of Aaron's kids, Nadab and Abihu. I think it could be a combination of both, actually. But given the fact that we were told previously that the age was 30, and now we're saying that it's 25, that seems to be a lowering of the age. So I kind of lean more towards maybe there's a 5-year apprenticeship, possibly. That's just my guess at it, though. Then we get to chapter 9, which is the second Passover. So this is the second time they observe a Passover. But when we get into verse 14 of chapter 9, Israelite law gave considerable attention to the status of resident aliens who identified with the Israelite religion. The same law applied to the native Israelites and to the aliens alike. Anyone who wanted to identify with the Israelite community of faith and who was willing to submit to the Lord's laws and statutes was permitted to do so. And I keep thinking about how we treat people who are not Christian, how we treat people who may be illegal aliens, people who don't think the same way we do. Do we treat them the same? Do we give them every opportunity to come into the fold with us, to be treated good? But I think a lot of people do. But I think the key part that we miss, even when we do treat people the same, we miss this key part, which was those who were willing to submit to the Lord's laws and statutes. We miss that part, you know. Even though you may be an alien in a strange land, and you've still got to go by the laws of that land. And if you want to join a community of faith, you've got to go by the laws and the beliefs of that faith. You can't just keep doing the same thing that you all did in your old culture. You've got to assimilate to the new. And that's what it's saying here. We get to verse 17 through 23. This was actually a song at one time. The poetic structure of verse 17 here hints that this section was originally a song that was sung during the wilderness journey. The song's refrain occurs in verse 18. And this Song of Journey, as it's called, set the stage for the actual departure from Mount Sinai in chapter 10, verses 11 through 36. I found that very interesting. Then we get into chapter 10 about the 2 silver trumpets. Now, the 2 silver trumpets were different from the ram's horn that we read about. in Leviticus. The shofar announced the Day of Atonement. That was Leviticus chapter 25, verse 9. And it was used in the march around Jericho at the beginning of the conquest of the Promised Land that we're going to read about later in Joshua chapter 6, verses 2 through 21. But the distinctive pitch of the silver trumpet summoned the people to march through the wilderness. It was also blown by the priest Phinehas in the battle against Midian that we're going to read about later in Numbers chapter 31. Later on, they had spent 11 months in the Sinai wilderness. The Lord would now begin to lead the people to his intended destination. You remember, it was an entire generation later. He let all that generation die off before he started leading this group of people to the Promised Land. And they're leaving Sinai and going into the Paran Desert. Now, I pulled a map up of this. There we are. We're kind of down here and round about number 8 on the list here is where they're leaving out of. 8 and 9. 8 was Sinai. 9 was the Sinai wilderness. They're headed northeast-ish is where they're going. So through the wilderness camps where they camped along the way up to 11, then on up to number 12 through the wilderness of Paran. They're heading to the wilderness of Paran right now as we're speaking. Verses 29 through 32. Moses noted twice that the Lord had promised good things to Israel, and twice Moses promised Hobab that the goodness would be apportioned to him as well if he would help guide them through the wilderness. Now, who was this Hobab, son of Reuel? The dual names Reuel, which we find in Exodus chapter 2, verse 18, we've read that, and Jethro, Exodus chapter 3, verse 1, we've read that, in reference to Moses' in-laws are perhaps references to 2 generations of the Midianite clan. Since the Hebrew term can mean either father-in-law or brother-in-law or just in-law, we really don't know. Thus, the patriarchal clan leader was probably named Reuel, taking father as grandfather, which is common in the Hebrew Bible. And the actual father-in-law of Moses was probably named Jethro. Others suggest that Jethro and Reuel are the same person, since dual names are commonly reflected in Bronze Age texts. But we really don't know. The question is, did Moses show a lack of faith by asking his brother-in-law to serve as a guide into the wilderness? The Bible here, it doesn't even give us a hint at all whether it was a lack of faith or whether it was something that God wanted him to do. Doesn't say. What do you think? What do you think about that? Do you think Moses might have had a little moment of a lack of faith by asking him to be the guide instead of relying on God completely to guide him through? Or do you think this is a God thing, that God is sending this guy to Moses to help them through? What's your perspective on that? Then, of course, we end it with chapter 10, verse 33 through 36, which is the battle song of the ark. Now, tomorrow, we're going to read through Numbers chapter 11, 12, and 13. So be ready. It's going to be a long one, too. What stuck out to you in this? Did I miss anything that really stuck out to you that you were interested about? Do you have any questions about something that we didn't talk about? Put in the comment section. Be sure to click the like button, the subscribe button, and of course click the little jingle bell so you can be notified the next time I upload a video, which is going to be tomorrow for another episode of the Bible in 1 Year with the Preacher's Husband. Bye.